God is equal to everyone, but welcome to Audarya Vision, a podcast where we try to develop a vision of compassion, of spiritual generosity, hence the word Audarya. And we do that by connecting with two essential Sanskrit Vedic philosophy texts, namely the Bhagavad Gita, which is considered to be the essence of Vedic knowledge, and the Shrimad Bhagavatam, a less well-known but much larger text of 14,000 verses, full of amazing stories of gods and goddesses and love stories and wars and curses, and which describes itself in the first pages of the text as the ripened fruit of the tree of all the Vedic literature. So if you're into Hinduism, yoga philosophy, Indian theology, you're in the right place and you're most welcome. We're going on with the series, the prayers of the Queen, and we're looking at the famous selected prayers by a really important character in the Mahabharata, who also appears in the Shrimad Bhagavatam, namely Queen Kunti, the mother of the 5 Pandava brothers, including Arjuna, the hero of the Bhagavad Gita. And so here we're looking at a verse where she indirectly raises the question of God's partiality. Like, is God fair? Is God equal towards everyone or not? And so that appears in the verse 29. And, it's a question we all ask ourselves, like, is God, fair to everybody? But then if we put some effort in trying to love him, is he going to reciprocate even more with me or not? Or what's up with that? So here's the verse. It goes like this in Sanskrit. Navena kaschid bhagavam chikirshitam taveha manasya nrinam vidambanam nayasya kaschid dayitasti karhichit deyascha yasmin vishamamatir nrinam. And here's a translation by my spiritual grandfather, Srila Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, whose translations of the Bhagavad Purana or the Shrimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita for that matter are the most by far widely translated in other languages and read all over the planet. So here is his translation. O Lord, this is Queen Kunti. She's speaking to God directly. God is accepted, or Krishna, or Vishnu, is accepted as God. We have a conception of a personal God here, which may irk some people with, very strong Advaita Vedanta tendencies. But hey, tough luck. At least tough luck when it comes to the Bhagavad Gita as well as the Shrimad Bhagavatam. Although that conception is not, looked down upon. But we'll talk about that another time, God willing. So she says, O Lord, no one can understand your transcendental pastimes, which appear to be human and are so misleading. You have no specific object of favor. And that's the key theme here. You have no specific object of favor, nor do you have any object of envy. People only imagine that you are partial. People only imagine that you are partial. So I think we're going to go back and revisit this verse in the next podcast, because the idea of God's pastimes, appearing human and being misleading is a whole topic in itself. So we'll do that another time. But so putting, that theme, namely the statement by Kunti that God has these transcendental pastimes. What does that mean? And they appear to be human and are so misleading. Let's put that to the side. Let's focus on the theme at hand, which I mentioned before at the beginning of this little recording. And thanks for listening, by the way. Queen Kunti is making a claim that God, or Krishna, has no specific object of favor, right? Nor any object of envy. So right away we can think, my God is a jealous God, and I will strike down, an entire population or an entire tribe of people, regardless of whether individually they're pious or not, regardless of whether individually, you kind of find that in biblical narratives, right? And on the other side of the same coin, the claim that God has no specific object of favor, like he really doesn't favor anyone in particular. And to add to that, or to emphasize that, people only imagine that you are partial. So she's making a claim that God is not partial, right? God's not partial. God has no object of favor, nor, on the other side of the coin, no, object of envy. So let's start with the envy thing. So naturally, if we accept the theological premise that God is totally self-satisfied, that God has no cause other than him, that God's determination is itself fact. That's actually a coined term from Prabhupada in one of his commentaries to the Bhagavad Gita. I really like it. His determination is actual fact. And that was actually brought up to me, kind of, you know how like sometimes you'll read something and then someone will like read the same passage to you and you'll be like, oh my God, I never read that before. Or I read that before, but it never dawned on me, right? So one of my mentors, his name is Brigupati Prabhu or Jeff Solomon, a direct student who met Prabhupada in the 70s. And so I always remember, like when I was in LA living in an ashram there, he one day he just pointed to that statement in the commentary to verse, I think 9.5 from the Bhagavad Gita. And I had read it, a good chunk of times. But when he said, you see, Krishna, God or Krishna's determination is itself fact. So in other words, and I was like, wow, So what does that mean? That means that when God, as opposed to us, when God desires something, boom, it happens automatically. There's no delay. There's no, what's it called? When you record something and there's some delay from it takes time for the wave, whether it's video wave or audio wave. I forget, there's a technical term, but there's no delay. Like there's not even a 0.00001 second delay between God's wishing something and then that thing actually happening. By definition, he's totally absolute, all powerful. So whenever he wants something, boom, it's there. It's like there's no delay whatsoever, right? And so for a person like that, you would think, like, why would a person like that, whose determination is itself actual fact, have any object of envy? Like, who could you be envious of when you're the only one in existence who's all powerful and omniscient? And by definition also full of love, full of compassion, full of gentleness, as we saw in the last podcast. So that's what Queen Kunti is saying. She's describing God as not, having any object of envy, right? And by the same token, or just on the flip side, no object of favor. No object of favor. And, she's like, people only imagine that you are partial. So by the same token, God has no I'm going to, for no, and the issue of for no good reason. Because you see, and I'll just drop it in right now, we'll develop it a little bit later, in a few minutes, Krishna does say in the Bhagavad Gita, this famous verse, Ye yatha mam prapadyante tam sataiva bhajamyaham. I think it's in the 7th chapter. Famous statement. Ye yatha mam prapadyante tam sataiva bhajamyaham. As one takes shelter of me, as one surrenders unto me, God says, I reward him or her accordingly. So there's a reciprocation, you see. There's an established premise that, okay, God's not partial to anyone. At the same time, he reciprocates. And they're not mutually exclusive. We just have to kind of figure out how they're not mutually exclusive, how these two concepts, are harmonized and harmonize each other and balance each other out and live in coexistence, right? So I think I would dare say that when Queen Kunti is saying that, God has no object of envy or favor and, people only imagine that you're partial, it would apply to God being partial for no good reason. Again, I don't want to diss biblical rhetoric here, but, you do hear, for example, or Jewish rhetoric, this notion of, there's a whole tribe, a whole, bloodline, coming from the mom, right? And that whole tribe, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, regardless of what any individual in that tribe does, is chosen by God, is the special chosen person. Not just person, is the chosen community, the chosen tribe, right? And you hear that, at least, in a lot of Jewish people would say that, hey, well, that's kind of what the Torah says, right? Or that's what we Jews believe, right? And I had a discussion just today about that with another disciple of Prabhupada whose name is Havi Prabhu Elan Chester, a Grammy Award winner from Venezuela. Wonderful man, in my opinion, and just traveled with him actually from Vrindavan near New Delhi to Mayapur in West Bengal, where I am right now. And so he's from a Jewish background, and he gave a really I'm not saying that this is a popular interpretation, but he made this really interesting point that, look, the Jews may be, the chosen ones, But it's not that God chose them. They made the conscious decision to choose God. You see, and because of their choice to take shelter of God, to choose God, then God reciprocates. And in that sense, they're chosen, they're blessed not because God whimsically chose them over someone else for no good reason, but rather because they, in contrast to others, decided to take up the call, to surrender to God, to serve God. Again, I'm not making a historical claim here, and I'm not saying that this is the actual interpretation, but it's definitely a fantastic one. And in that sense, I mean, to me, it makes perfect sense. Otherwise, why would God, for no reason, like, you know what? Like, there's no reason whatsoever to love you less than, your other sibling, but hey, I'm going to love you a little. It kind of reminds you of the whimsical gods and goddesses of Greek mythology, just kind of on a whim, they'll just kill somebody, and on a whim, they'll bless somebody else for no reason whatsoever, just totally whimsical. So in that sense, Queen Kunti, I believe, is saying, look, God is not partial, right? Now, when it comes to, people may say that you're partial. One example that comes to mind is the example that you find in the Shrimad Bhagavatam, a little bit later in the 8th book, where there's the famous, universal transplanetary system fight, the battle between the gods and the demons, or the suras and the asuras, the devas and the asuras. Asura, when you're like, word ahimsa, so himsa means violence, ahimsa means non-violence. So sura, saintly, godly; asura, non-saintly, non-godly. In other words, demoniac, to use a blunt term, right? Atheistic, demoniac, selfish, evil, mean, brutal, violent. And so there's this story, and I'm not getting into it, but I really do recommend you read it. And as a matter of fact, I really recommend you read these books, the Bhagavad Gita. I would recommend the as it is version. I'd recommend the Shrimad Bhagavatam translated by Prabhupada. You can find those online for free. You can go to vedabase.io. You can go to prabhupada.io. There's all sorts of websites where you get these books for free. So read that story. Read that story of the gods and the asuras. And so coming back to the story, there's this intergalactic fight between the gods and the demons, because they both come from the same mother, from the same one of the main, progenitors of mankind in the universe, as described in the Shrimad Bhagavatam. And so they're having an argument, and they're fighting for some nectar, some divine nectar, which is churned out of an ocean, and it's like this divine nectar, and both want it equally. And then you've got this avatar of God called Mohini Murti, this gorgeous woman, who has a spiritual form, of course. Here, every time we're talking about an avatar of God here, in the sense of God with a capital G, not an empowered soul like a Jesus, or, let's be generous, or a Muhammad, or I would believe someone like Prabhupada. We're talking about like full-fledged God avatar, okay? So when we're talking about an avatar in that category, the body of that avatar is always Satchit Ananda, always fully spiritual. It's not a soul embodied in a physical, carnal, covering. It's the inside and the outside, the heart, the veins, so-called, veins and heart and skin and soul of God are all exactly of the same nature, all spiritual, eternal, full of bliss. So Mohini Murti, this beautiful, just irresistibly beautiful woman, who's actually Vishnu in disguise, or an avatar of Vishnu, but they don't realize he's Vishnu or she's Vishnu, kind of like pretends that she's partial, and then she actually at the end she tricks the demons. She tricks the demons and gives the nectar to those who are pious, those who are more inclined towards devotion to God. And then the demons flip out. They're like, you cheated us. You said you were partial. You said you were going to give it to us just as much as to the gods, but blah, blah, blah. And so we could say, I'm not claiming that Queen Kunti is referring specifically here to that story, because there's other examples of God favoring a particular, soul as opposed to another, and then appearing to be partial. But that's a great example here, where she only appears to be partial. And so why only appears? I mean, in the story of the gods and the demons, God is clearly partial. He clearly favors the gods over the demons. So then what's up with this claim that that he has no specific object of favor, right? Well, here is, again, and I'm going to bring this back up. Remember, I planted the seed. Oh, I mean, that sounds so pretentious. I'm such a pretentious person. I wish I was less. Remember, I referred to that famous verse in the Gita, as one surrenders, as one takes shelter of me, I reward him accordingly. So in the same way, here, no, not in the same way. Here, let's bring that up again, right? Krishna does claim that, look, I reciprocate. And so if someone is, giving a lot more love to God than someone else, then naturally God's gonna, reciprocate the love that's being given to him. And that may look as something partial, but actually he's just reciprocating with the love that one party is giving and the other is not. And here's the, a nice example is, let's say there's a mother in a family or a father in a family, and then let's say they have 3 kids. Let's just make it simple. They have 2 kids, and one kid is like really obedient and just really loving and really helps out the parents, and they'll do whatever the parents ask, and they look out for the parents' welfare, and and so on, right? And then the other kid is just like, F you mom, F you dad, like, and like, I can't wait to, and when he does maybe, hit the age of 18, he runs away and he tells everybody bad things about the parents, doesn't care about the family business or whatever, or doesn't care about helping the parents when they get old. Or it's not a perfect analogy, of course, because we believe, at least according to the Shrimad Bhagavatam, that God's eternally young, but just, let's just play with that analogy. So the parents, if they're sane, will still love both children the same, but that first one who reciprocates and who's, as I described him, they're gonna have extra affection for him. They're gonna reciprocate. Oh, he's doing so much for us. Boom, here's an extra kiss, here's an extra hug, here's an extra blessing, right? So God, according to the Bhagavad conception, is a person, and he reciprocates like that. You see, so it's kind of like those two things are in balance, and they're not mutually exclusive. They're just, very sort of fine-tuned, delicate concepts, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. The one being that God has no object of envy or object of favor. He, loves everyone. He says, Sarva yonishu konteya aham bija padak pita. Elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, of all, I'm the father, I'm the seed-giving father of all species, of all souls, of all embodied beings. So God, according to the Bhagavad Gita, has equal vision. Vidya vinaya sampane brahmane gavi hashtini sunichaiva sopakecha pandita samadarshina 5:18. Really important verse you should know. And that's the vision of a self-realized soul, but it definitely applies to the vision of God, right? According to God, every soul, not just every human being, but every soul is loved by him equally. It's not just Arjuna on the battlefield. It's not just human beings. It's everybody, because everyone's God's son. I remember once I was in Paris, and I was having lunch with Vyasaki Prabhu, a famous kirtan leader, also a disciple of Prabhupada. And I was having lunch with him in an Indian restaurant with him and his wife from Mexico. And there was this like boisterous group of Indian tourists who came into the restaurant, and they were making so much noise, and they were just so obnoxious. A big one, like 50 of them. And I started complaining. I said, they're so like yuck, and they're probably just going to, which is true, they're all going to the Lido or the Moulin Rouge, to see naked women. And they're going to go into this restaurant, they're going to get, eat their meat, and even, cow meat, which, for Hindus is just like really reprehensible. And I was just like, and then I'll always remember this. He said, well, why do you say that? Why don't you look at them? Do you think Krishna sees them like that? Why don't you see them like God sees them? Why don't you see them like God sees them? And I was like, wow, that's true. So according to the Bhagavad philosophy, God is totally partial, and he loves everyone. Right? He loves everyone equally, whether that soul is in a pig body or in a bird body or in a human body or in a human atheist body or a human, pure lover of God body. He loves everyone equally. At the same time, he is a person, so he's going to reciprocate. And he, according to the Gita, according to his own words, he does. He reciprocates. Right? So that should like be a good inspiration for you, because that should like remind you that, okay, like God loves everyone, but if I serve God, if I chant God's names, if I read scripture about God, if I help to connect others to God, then I'm going to get special mercy. I'm going to, He loves everybody else, but because I'm trying to serve God, He's going to bless me all the more, right? And you want to have God's blessings. Because if God exists, then, then your life is blessed and you have a lot more fun, literally. Like we all want fun, and if you live a life dedicated to God and living, a life, devoted to as an offering to God, then, yes, material life is suffering no matter how you cut the cake. But in that suffering, or in that life of suffering, you suffer, a lot less, and you enjoy a lot more too. And that enjoyment ultimately is spiritual enjoyment. You get spiritual happiness. And we can't really perceive what spiritual happiness is because we've never really experienced it. So it's like when we hear the word like, hey, like live a life devoted to God because you'll get a lot of spiritual happiness. We're like, huh? Like, what is that? Like, I can't really relate. Just like, so leave me alone. I'm just going to continue watching porn, or I'm going to continue, whatever, eating my hot dogs, and I'm going to continue, living a life that's totally selfish, right? But if we could understand a little bit what it means to receive, special mercy, special attention from an all-loving God, then we would probably be a lot more devoted to Him, right? All right, well, thanks for hearing. Thanks for spending time with me. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to purify my consciousness, and I hope we meet again real soon. And until then, take care. Hare Krishna. Om Tat Sat.